They told you the Civil War was about states' rights, but they didn't tell you which rights the right to own another human, to build an economy off the backs of the enslaved, and to protect that system at all costs. In school, you might get a textbook definition. The American Civil War, 1861-1865, was a conflict between the Union and the Confederacy. But what they don't teach is the emotional, brutal, and complex reality that split a nation in two. This wasn't just about blue versus gray uniforms. It was about 620,000 lives lost, families torn apart, a president assassinated, and a young nation forced to decide what kind of country it wanted to be. The war didn't start overnight. It simmered over decades, over cotton, over territory, over who was considered a person and who was considered property. And when it finally exploded, it wasn't just battles being fought. It was America's very soul on the line. The war officially began on April 12, 1861, when Confederate forces opened fire on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. But its roots go much deeper, all the way back to the nation's founding. From the very beginning, America had been divided over slavery. The North gradually moved toward abolition, while the South expanded slavery into its economy and daily life. The Missouri Compromise, 1820, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, 1854, and the Dred Scott Decision, 1857, were all signs of a deepening national crisis. Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860 on a platform that opposed the expansion of slavery was the final spark. Southern states saw it as a threat to their way of life and began to secede, one by one, starting with South Carolina. Within months, 11 states had formed the Confederate States of America. This was no longer political debate. It was war. The war was fought between the Union, the North, led by President Abraham Lincoln, and the Confederacy, the South, led by Jefferson Davis. But it wasn't just governments fighting. It was brothers against brothers, neighbors turned enemies, a nation bleeding from both sides. The Union wanted to preserve the country and later abolish slavery. The Confederacy wanted to protect its sovereignty and its slave-based economy. Each side believed they were fighting for freedom, but with drastically different definitions of what freedom meant. The North had more industry, more railroads, and a larger population. But the South had better generals in the early years and the advantage of fighting on home ground. What most schools don't emphasize is how personal this war was. It wasn't happening on distant battlefields. It was in people's backyards, churches, schools, and homes. From 1861 to 1865, the war became one of the bloodiest in human history. Major battles like Antietam, Gettysburg, and Chickamauga were not just military conflicts, they were human catastrophes. At Gettysburg alone, over 50,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing in just 3 days. Soldiers weren't just dying from bullets, they died from infection, hunger, exposure, and even friendly fire. Medical care was primitive, and amputations were performed without anesthesia. The Civil War brought ironclads, trench warfare, and scorched earth tactics. It was a testing ground for modern war and a graveyard for hundreds of thousands. But the pain wasn't just on the battlefield. Mothers lost sons, wives lost husbands, children became orphans. And through all this, the enslaved waited, hoping that their chains might finally break. Make no mistake, the Civil War was about slavery. The South's entire economy and culture were built on it. Cotton was king, and enslaved people were treated as currency. The North wasn't blameless. Either many industries profited from slave-produced goods. But as the war dragged on, its moral core shifted. On January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all enslaved people in Confederate territory were free. It didn't immediately free everyone, but it changed the war's purpose. Now, it wasn't just about preserving the Union, it was about ending slavery, and Black Americans answered the call. Nearly 200,000 black soldiers and sailors fought for the Union, many of whom were formerly enslaved. They weren't just fighting for a flag, they were fighting for their families, their futures, and their rightful place in history. The war ended on April 9, 1865, when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. But peace didn't come easily. Just 5 days later, President Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. The man who held the country together didn't live to see its healing. The cost of the war was staggering. 620,000 to 750,000 lives lost, more than all other American wars combined. Cities lay in ruins, economies collapsed, and generations were traumatized. And even though slavery was legally ended with the 13th Amendment later that year, the wounds of racism and division would linger for more than a century. Reconstruction tried to rebuild the South, but faced fierce resistance. Black Americans were technically free, but freedom in name is not the same as freedom in reality. The American Civil War wasn't just about battles and generals. It was about what it means to be human, to fight for justice, to confront your nation's sins, and to redefine what it means to be American. Most schools don't tell you how close the country came to permanent fracture, or how the choices made then still shape America today. They don't tell you about the black women who acted as spies, or the children who carried water to soldiers, or the enslaved who sabotaged plantations from within. They don't tell you how America's first taste of total war planted the seeds for future conflicts, or how the mythology of the lost cause reshaped Southern memory and erased black heroes from textbooks. The Civil War ended on paper in 1865, but its legacy still breathes in every debate about race, freedom, and unity. The American Civil War was not a closed chapter. It's an open wound. It teaches us that a nation divided by hate, inequality, and greed can destroy itself from within. But it also teaches us about resilience, about people who risked everything for freedom, about leaders who dreamed of a better union, about soldiers who died so others might live free. What schools don't teach you is that history isn't just dates and facts. It's blood, hope, and consequence. If we don't understand what truly happened between 1861 and 1865, we risk repeating it. This war was not just America's past, it is America's warning.